Today, I'm in a BMW 1 Series. It's a 2017, and it's really impressed me. Really, I've never been in a 1 Series before, and I've always thought, until recently, they look very bland and very basic and very simple, and just BMW's answer to an entry-level vehicle. And I remember before I drove an A-Class, not the Mercedes are on sort of the 4th iteration of A-Class now. You'll see where I'm going in a minute, I promise you, even though we're in a BMW. So, Mercedes on the 1st iteration. So I bought and sold 2 Mark 1 Mercedes A-Classes, and they're a bit top heavy because Mercedes designed them to be a very primitive EV, and they were going to have batteries underneath them, so they were very top heavy because they didn't ever put the batteries in, which would have the counterweight and stop them tipping over. And they were just a bit of fun, and I suppose at the time Mercedes have always been stylish and making cool looking cars. They were a good looking car at the time, but they've dated a lot now, and they don't look quite as cool now. They look a bit of a bus rather than a little bus rather than a cool car. Then they did the Mark II, and I owned a Mark II. I had an avant-garde spec, which at the time was Mercedes terminology for the brand new, for the top spec Mercedes range. So I had the Mark II, which was a great car, but looked a bit like a modern day B-Class, so they're a bit, again, dated and old-fashioned, and again, tall. And that's sort of what you expect. That's sort of what you associated with an A-Class, this sort of tall, funny-looking thing. They looked a bit like an Audi A2, I suppose, as well, which didn't ever take off, and Audi dropped. Mercedes kept up with the A-Class. BMW brought the 1 Series in, kept up with the 1 Series. But I remember being at first thinking, why have Mercedes done an A-Class and why have BMW done a 1 Series? Because to me it was a bit of a trying to be a jack of all trades. Mercedes at the time had the sort of C, E and S, and they've done obviously things like the CL. Sorry, they haven't done the CLA at all. They've done things like the CLS, and they've done the ML, and they've done the G-Wagon, and they've done the GL, which has now become the GLS. So they've done things like that, but I'm thinking, why have you entered into this sort of the bottom end of the consumer market? Because Mercedes had this, oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz? They had this sort of name of being prestigious and something that wasn't affordable by the average Joe. And they sort of went to tap into that market of the average Joe, and Royce haven't tapped into that market, and Bentley haven't tapped into that market. Aston Martin created a little tiny city car. I didn't see the point of, alright, you can say I had an Aston Martin, but then someone said, let me see it then, and you'd be like, well, it's... So, I don't see why, and I know they're not the same sort of price point as an Aston Martin or a Ferrari or a Bentley, but I still don't see why they did it, or didn't see why they did it. Same with BMW. So BMW, Audi did the A2, it flopped, they got rid of it. The A3, I suppose, arguably, and then now the A1. The A1's right at the bottom end of the market. But it's a nice looking car. I really don't like the A1, but it's a small A1 for all intents and purposes. But I don't like it personally. So the A-Class then went into its 3rd generation. I had one of them as well, and it was an AMG Night Edition, and it was really nice and really sporty. You felt every bump in the road, but it was a nice car. And then they've sort of revised it again recently and just tweaked it slightly, but it's always been sort of a low down hatchback, a hot hatch with this 3rd and 4th generation, and it just looks tasty, it looks nice. BMW brought the 1 Series out. The 1st generation 1 Series I think was at the time might have looked okay, because again, BMW do nice cars, so I suppose it did look okay at the time, but now it's very dated, and I wasn't a fan of it at all. And I wasn't particularly a fan of this. This is, like I say, on a 17. I wasn't really a fan of this. The new generation 1 Series they've just brought out looks a little like an A-Class for me. They've sort of pulled some design ideas from Mercedes, but what a car. It's stunning. It really does look the part, the new 1 Series. I'm really impressed with it. And it sort of really instills back in me what BMW are known for. As I've said before, you're either a Mercedes, an Audi, or a BMW fanboy, in my opinion. And I'm a Mercedes man. But one thing you cannot take away from BMW is that outside of their vehicles, their exterior styling is just on point. It's just stunning. I think Mercedes have got it nailed inside. Mercedes make outside of a Mercedes vehicle is always gorgeous, but I think the Mercedes interior is just class leading. Audi, a mix of the outside and in. Yeah, they're nice. They're a bit plain for me, but they're nice. But BMW's outside exteriors of the vehicles are they're just stunning. They really are head-turning vehicles. The new 3 Series that's just come out is just them front lights on it and things like that. But so this was something I was never really interested in. Hadn't really given it much credit or thought about it, and I really like the new 1 Series. So when the opportunity came up to have this for a few days and see what I thought of it, I thought I'll jump at it, I'll take it and see, and then hopefully I'll get my hands on a new 1 Series and we can do a bit of a comparison. And I think I'm really impressed with it. It's a manual, and personally I'm not a big manual fan. My girlfriend's got a Mini Cooper that's a manual, and I like that. It's a nice short shifter, you sat very, very low and you've got full control of the vehicle. I like certain cars, I like being in a manual. 911 I drove, that was a manual, that was a nice, I wanted to drive that, but I wouldn't want either of them as my daily driver. I'm used to now, from having Mercedes for 10-15 years and Range Rovers for the past 5 years, for being, I suppose I'm very lazy. I'm used to putting it into drive, sit back, heated seat on, drive along, we get to the destination and we stop and we put it in park, and that's the end of the situation. There's no changing gears and stalling. That's when I was 17. There's no changing gears, there's no messing about with things like we're stuck in traffic and constantly on and off and back into first and off into neutral so that you can rest your foot and then holding down the clutch and all that sort of carry-on that you've got in stop-start traffic you just don't have with an automatic. So I'm very much an automatic sort of driver now. I love an automatic, but occasionally I do like a manual. I wouldn't have one as my daily driver, as I said, but I do still like a manual. I do like the control it gives you over the vehicle and the way it feels, and it does drive a bit better than an automatic personally. So aside from the gearbox, this car is a pleasure to drive. It really, really is. It's a hot hatch, it's a small car, it's not a, you know, it's never going to pretend to be a 3 Series Touring, it's never going to pretend to be a Discovery, you know, it's not trying to be this big, massive vehicle with tons of room in the back and a big boot and all that sort of stuff. That's not, or high up, it's not its game at all. It's compared to the A-Class, it's comparable to the A3. That's sort of where it sits on the market, and you know, the pricing is not bad on them either. They're not bad money brand new, and they're certainly not bad money a few years old. This is 3 years old. This has only done 15,000 miles. It's been really well looked after inside and out, and it shows. But aside from how well it's been looked after, it reminds me of selling cars years ago and buying a 3 Series that was probably 15 years old at the time and had done 150, 180,000 miles, and how well built it was. Nothing was falling apart, everything was solid, everything felt great. It was a bit tired, it was a bit marked inside and out, and it had a few different shades of paint on it on the outside and stuff, but just really, really well made, and they feel well made. The thing with the BMW is, they always say the BMW is a driver's car, and until you've driven a BMW, I don't think you can sort of understand what they mean with that, but it really is. The seats aren't the comfiest seats I've ever sat in, by a long shot. They're comfy, don't get me wrong, but you know, I've sat in sort of seats in a Bentley that hug you, and seats in a Range Rover that massage my back as I'm driving along with a hot stone massage, and all these sorts of seats in cars I've driven. So they're not going to win any awards for being the comfiest seat. They're not even leather or half leather or suede or anything like that. They're just material seats, but they've been thought out. The way they hold you as you're driving along is comfortable. It's round you. It's not sports seat round you, bucket seat round you. It's just round you, and it's round you in the right way. And they've thought about the amount of time they've invested in making sure this is the ideal driving position for the driver. Is just unreal. The orange backlit display that you get on the clocks, you know, it's on something like its 70th or 80th variation of that orange, and it looks dated, and it's like, why on earth are they still using orange? Why are we not using white or blue? Or, I mean, the M cars, they use the white, but why are we not doing that? Why are we using orange? And it's all designed to be reducing fatigue. So when you're driving at night time, the dazzle on your eyes of these white and blue and red clocks, the orange doesn't do that, and that orange has got better and better over time to make sure that we're reducing that amount of fatigue that we've got, and we're keeping people awake and safety. BMW are really big on the X7 that I drove, you know, all the collision avoidance and pedestrian avoidance, and the fact that it'll slam on the anchors and it'll keep you in the lane on the motorway, and it'll radar guided cruise control. All them things are at the forefront of, and this car hasn't got them bits, but they're at the forefront of that, and they're all about the driver. And it shows with this. I mean, you can see it in as far as the iDrive system, so simple to use. And as I said, this is 3 years old. It's got satellite navigation, it's got Bluetooth audio, it's got Bluetooth phone. But it's just so simple to use, even in its primitive sense, that you just jump in and you already know what to do. It's a bit like an iPhone, really. I don't mean in the looks of it, I mean in as far as you can give a 3-year-old an iPhone and they can work out how to take a picture with it and how to, you know, view them pictures and how to make a phone call and how to send a text message. All them things are just very intuitive out of the box, and you don't need a manual for an iPhone. It's the same with the BMW. You get in and there's not a ridiculous amount of buttons. It's quite simple, but there's enough buttons. There's the right amount of buttons. You've not got sort of buttons that do this, that and the other, but you have got buttons that enable you to do what you need to do to get along and have the right amount of technology and comfort and luxury with it. You know, there's some blankers where the heated seat switches that go and things like that, because it's not got heated seats on this model. But it's just really well designed, and it's, you know, there's bits of brushed aluminium and there's leather in places where there should be leather. The other thing that I found weird with these BMWs is they still have a manual handbrake, and you think, how time's moved on. It's a bit like having a manual window winder now, isn't it? Having a manual handbrake that you pull on, and it's not an electronic parking brake that automatically disengages as you set off. But you think, there's something to it. So it's also got the seat on the manual adjuster rather than electric. And I've said this before in videos about this manual seat. If the electrics in this vehicle fail in 30 years time and you can't move that seat, we've got a bit of an issue, haven't we? Whereas you're never going to have that fail, and if it does, it's just a new cable. So someone can always get in this seat and get it into a comfortable position where they can drive along safely, which again, as we discussed, is an important thing to BMW. I think the same with the handbrake. A handbrake, yeah, it can go past its working travel, the handbrake cable can snap. But aside from that, what can go wrong with a pull operated handbrake that's existed for, you know, 50 years and more? Whereas now we're obsessed with electronic parking brakes, that the control module can fail, the ECU can no longer talk to it, so it can't release the parking brake, so it's stuck on, or it won't engage anymore, or, you know, and with a manual box, you put it into gear and you can leave it, and you can not worry so much about the handbrake, apart from if you need an MLT. But with an auto, you can put it into park, but it puts excessive strain on the gearbox, so it's better to actually have the electronic parking brake on. But if that's failed, you're stuck, aren't you? Or you're going to have to spend some money anyway. So I think the sort of crucial bits being manual and old school, why not? Do you know, it's just, so it's got everything we need. It's got Bluetooth audio, it's got Bluetooth phone, it's got sat-nav, blisteringly cold air conditioning. Could do with a little bit of, like I say, heated seats for the winter months, I suppose. But aside from that, everything's nailed with it. But it's just, whether this is the basic spec or the top spec, it doesn't really matter. It's to demonstrate this, really, that this car is it's been overlooked by me, and I've sort of seen it go down the road, and like I say, in this generation, it's a nice looking car, goes past. It's not as good as the new one, it's not as nice as the new one to look at. But with BMW, it doesn't seem to be about that. It seems to be about, do you know what, they'll keep that shape because it works, it still sells, and it's a nice looking thing. But what they will do is they'll enhance everything about that driver's experience, and making sure that, you know, this steering wheel feels right in your hands, and the pedals aren't stupid with daft bits on them. They're well spaced and mean that you know exactly what pedal you're on, and you're not going to have an accident or slip off them or anything like that. The room in the back's fine for the size of car that it is, and, you know, the seats go down to make the boot space bigger. The boot's a decent size. It's not, you know, again, it's not a touring boot, but it's a decent size. And I think if we understand what's been important to BMW and where their focus has been, and why this car is what it is, I think actually it takes on a whole new dimension, and it becomes something that you think makes a lot of sense now, and I can see exactly why they did that. It's still a great car to drive as well. I mean, it goes through the gears really well, it doesn't sort of fling you about, it's got enough power. It's a 1.5 this, 1.5 petrol engine, and it drives, it's got enough pickup if you need it to, and it doesn't feel like you're screaming you don't feel like you're screwing its doodads getting to that sort of speed. It's just, it drives well, it handles well, it's very akin to the Mini Cooper that our partner's got, in as far as sometimes you're driving along in sort of 30 and 40 mile an hour, and you're in second and you don't realise it. You think you're in fourth, and then it flashes and say put it in third, and you're thinking, oh, and you move up the gears, but it doesn't ever seem to struggle, and it doesn't seem to rev its bits off when you're trying to do that. So I'm really, really impressed. I can't wait to get into a new one and see what the new one's like, but this is something that's really been overlooked by me, and sort of I've been impressed by. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have, please do consider smashing that like button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and don't forget to ring that bell to be notified of all the new content I drop, and I'll see you all very soon.